My name is Bonnie Craigie, and I work with Rural Community Assistance Corporation, better known as RCAC. And I am based out of Denver, but I lived in the Pacific Northwest for 30 years, and I'm really happy to be back, actually, and to support Southern Oregon in addressing this housing crisis that we currently have throughout rural America, and small cities, urban areas, everything you can imagine. A bit about RCAC. We partner with underserved rural and indigenous communities to achieve their vision and well-being through financial assistance, or through technical assistance, training, financial resources, and advocacy. And rural is our specialty, of course, hence the name. Today on our panel, we have a wide variety of experience, and we will be talking about the headwinds and challenges at the federal level. And despite these, Oregon is fortunate to have significant new resources for funding housing development, new laws encouraging and guiding housing production, and expanded technical assistance supports for local jurisdictions to navigate new state laws and plan goals for increasing housing production in their communities. Our panelists bring a wide variety of perspectives to these issues. We have state folks who can inform us about new housing accountability and production goals and resources, first-hand experience as elected officials responding to the devastation of the 2020 fires and having to navigate the myriad zoning and land use rules, expertise on community land trusts as a model to ensure long-term affordability and community control of housing and other community assets, and what it takes for affordable housing developers to navigate the complexity and risks of the pre-development stage to ensure that their projects are feasible. I'm going to turn the mic over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Sean Edging, would you please start the introductions and then just pass the mic to Talia and then over to Michelle?
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, folks. My name's Sean Edging. I'm a housing planner at the new Housing Accountability and Production Office, which we'll be talking about in today's panel. I apologize. I remember on the first panel, I was like, oh man, why didn't the folks sit in order? And then I sit up at the panel, and then of course we sit out of order. So I apologize. I'm the third one down? Yeah. I'll pass it over to Talia.
Hi everyone, I'm Talia Kahn-Kravis, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Homeownership Programs at Oregon Housing and Community Services, and just really happy to be here with you all today.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle King. I'm the City Planner for the City of Medford. City Planning Director for the City of Medford. I have a long history in city planning, and specifically in looking at revitalization and redevelopment of areas that are changing in industry. So I'm looking forward to thinking about creative ways to add housing types and housing numbers to Medford.
Great, and my name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner. We were given a chunk of time for our intro, so I wanted to put some content into this and show some slides. I'm wearing kind of two hats. One is the Executive Director for New Spirit Village, which is an affordable homeownership project in Medford. The other is as the former city manager and talent right after the wildfires. But just wanted to kick us off by saying thank you all for being here. It's really personal for me. I actually finished high school in Southern Oregon, and housing for me is all about dignity. We lived in a very modest place, and there was some of the embarrassment that's sometimes associated. I felt that as a kid, so I'm very mindful of all the work that you all do and really greatly appreciate that. And just in a big summary before I get the intro, so we were asked about increasing housing production in general, reduce barriers, support those doing the work and making things happen, and build cool and accessible homes. And your definition of cool will actually date you a little bit as to whether you think it means neat or energy efficient and green building. So the two perspectives I bring is, again, on the city manager perspective and as the ED of New Spirit Village. And I wanted to use this time to give background on both. And so first on talent. And just want to say I'm going to use some pictures as well for those of you who are wildfire survivors, just flagging potential trigger warning. So 2020 Labor Day fires. This is a picture from Phoenix. And yell at me if, oh, that's the other side. I thought someone was translating. So a third of the city was destroyed. This is an example of a before and after of a business downtown. Earlier in my career, I worked in Bosnia and Kosovo after the war, and when I first saw Talent, which I was very familiar with afterwards, it looked to me like a war zone. People literally had minutes to flee. This is actually Talent, but it gives you a sense of the absolute devastation from the fire. In summary, 3 people lost their lives. Again, people had just minutes to flee. Over 2,400 homes in the whole region, and so this went Talent, mostly, Ashland, Talent, and Phoenix got hit the hardest, some of Medford and unincorporated land as well. And those who were hardest hit were the most vulnerable. For those of you familiar with Southern Oregon, affordable housing was Phoenix and Talent. And so mostly farm workers, seniors on fixed income. Many did not have insurance and were not FEMA eligible, and we addressed that actually began to address that in Talent. New Spirit Village kind of came out of that. There was a couple that retired, a wealthy couple that retired to Ashland, and when I was actually in Talent, I got this call saying, hey, we'd like to help out on housing. And I thought, oh, that's nice, they want to volunteer. No, they wanted to contribute $1 million to beginning affordable development of affordable housing, and that became New Spirit Village, which is a partnership, and we'll talk more about that. So Barry and Catherine Thalden started this vision of accessibility, a community-driven design, and we have many of our partners actually in this room. It's great to see. And then also having a fire-resilient, energy-efficient, sustainable construction, and really community-led discussion. It's received a lot of attention. The governor came in and did the ribbon cutting last year, and we've had our U.S. senators coming to look at that really as a potential model for this work. And wanted to give a special shout out to Oregon Community Foundation, who's asked to draft up, look at both, what worked, some of the opportunities for improvement on the project, and that's something I'm working on now for them. And with that, turn it back to the questions.
Sure. So let's get started with our questions. Our first question is directed to Sean with the Housing Accountability and Production Office, and my trick question for you is it HAPO or HAPO?
Oh yeah, I have the same thing when I read things but have not heard somebody say it's HAPO.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with the role of HAPO to ensure implementation of the state housing laws. Can you expand on the services, the funding, the guidance, technical support that you'll be providing?
Yeah, absolutely. And, so we did have a table on this, so I apologize to those who, joined us. You're going to be hearing this again, but we've been really honing in our elevator pitch, so I'll start with that. So again, Sean Edging, a housing planner at the new Housing Accountability and Production Office. This is a new joint office that was established in 2024 via the governor's housing production package, formerly known as Senate Bill 1537. We are a joint office between the Department of Land Conservation, that's the department that I work at, and my colleague Joel, who's in the audience, works at, as well as the Building Codes Division in the Department of Consumer and Business Services. And basically, the kind of goal or the objective that our office is trying to achieve is to partner with local governments and housing developers to reduce barriers to production. And there's kind of 2 major ways that we do that I can kind of talk about. One is around facilitating kind of compliance with Oregon's housing laws. In the past couple of years, the legislature has been really busy kind of establishing new laws to kind of reduce barriers to production. And so me and the team that I am on consist of a variety of technical experts that are designed to kind of help connect local governments and developers with the tools, resources, information, and of course funding and assistance that they need to be able to facilitate those laws and of course reduce barriers to production. There's also another side of our office which is really focused around navigation. I think we've heard in conversations today that navigating a lot of different kind of state funding programs, policies can be very complex. And wouldn't it be nice if there was an organization or an office that could help kind of, navigate help navigate those complexities? And that's another role that our office has, is that kind of navigation and coordination function. We've been kind of hard at work with a lot of different things, kind of setting up our office to be operational on the statutory date of July 1st. That includes, getting ready to be able to intake inquiries from local governments and developers, being able to connect local governments with assistance that they need to do the necessary code work, planning to reduce barriers to production, and of course, starting to work on implementing those laws and providing the tools necessary to facilitate production on the ground.
So what are your two current priorities that are the most important for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So those two priorities, again, we have the kind of housing laws side of it, and we also have the housing navigation side of it. Basically, one being focused on, kind of ensuring that we're complying with Oregon's housing laws and reducing barriers to production there, and then the other one being facilitating and helping navigate the complexities of different state policies, programs, and connecting folks with resources. Something I'll add just about on those two priorities, we've been kind of hard at work getting a lot of different processes ready. We have started developing kind of like an intake form and policies and procedures around, all right, how do we connect folks with resources? How do we respond to inquiries that come our way, that type of thing. And of course, we've also been working on different guidance materials for local governments to support implementation of Oregon's housing laws. Examples include some required flexibilities that are in Senate Bill 1537 to certain development and design standards to kind of reduce barriers to production. But there's other examples that we're going to be rolling out as we continue to operate in this space of supporting local governments and developers.
Has HAPO started accumulating any best practices? Do you have some examples of communities in Southern Oregon that you've worked with yet? Or, I recognize this is pretty new for you. Go ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll start with that caveat, right? So we are a new office, and so because of that, we haven't had that time to kind of accumulate, right, those stories, those things that work. But I do want to speak a little bit to this question because I think it's pretty important that one of the objectives that we have is to provide those tools that reduce barriers to production, and we have a few goals both in the near term as well as the long term to kind of help support that goal. So in the near term, I think what we're looking to do is to provide these different tools for reducing barriers to production. So I've mentioned things like the mandatory adjustments. This is a law that requires, essentially providing flexibility to housing development that meets certain requirements to ensure that we are kind of minimizing barriers to production. So supporting local governments in the implementation of that, supporting laws that are intended to facilitate the development of affordable housing in different contexts. There's several laws that have been passed over the years that we really want to focus on supporting implementation there. And really just providing the tools necessary to ensure that, on the ground, it's not like we're trying to wonder, what is state housing law around, facilitating affordable housing. We're providing that resource for folks, and we're able to connect folks. We're able to answer questions. We're able to respond to inquiries, and of course, connect folks with other state agencies that touch on that process. But more long-term, and I think this is something that I kind of wanted to, tap in a little bit with our fellow local planner in the room, is that I think really one of our big priorities over the next couple of years is to start and build relationships. So we're pretty new. We haven't, DLCD hasn't really been tasked with this being a resource for housing developers, though we do have this broad resource in relationships with local governments. So something I think we're going to be looking for over the next couple of years are examples of things that work, and of course examples of things that are challenges or barriers. I'll highlight, we actually have one kind of specific requirement in Senate Bill 1537 that requires us to develop reports that analyze kind of different development processes as well as, different state agencies, policies, and programs to ensure that we are facilitating production. So that's something that we're really going to be looking for in the coming years.
And Michelle, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to some of the best practices you've seen in the course of your career, or anything that would help developers successfully navigate the planning process.
Yeah, I think my number one piece of advice is to start early with your concept and work with your city leaders and planning staff to understand what the community is looking for, in general, what the development site could support. If we a lot of times come across potential funding sources for affordable housing, and don't have a project to attach it to. So, if you're starting a project that's going to have an affordability component, come in and meet with your planning staff, your housing community development staff, and let them know what you're intending on doing. And are there any resources that the city could connect you with, or could the city partner with a project? Because there are opportunities out there, and sometimes we just don't have a way to connect to a development. So having those partners, building those partnerships and relationships early would be really great. From the city's perspective, some of the things that we're looking at doing is trying to be creative with the different funding sources we have to help support different types of housing. We're also starting a project in which we'll be looking at all of the city's property based on its zoning designation, and looking for developability and having that developability identified up front, so we can tell a property owner, your property could support X number of units based on our analysis. So we're looking at some ArcGIS tools that will help us create basically a prepackaged amount of developability that a developer can look at and say, oh, okay, so I have the support from the city. They've looked at this property and they know what it could handle. We're going to work to kind of meet that need and work with the city to develop the highest product we can. The other thing I think I would suggest to developers is to get out of your comfort zone. We see developers in Medford build the same product over and over again, and those are great products. They fill a need, but there's lots of other types of housing that the city really needs to see be built. So one of the things we'll be working on is putting together a little developer working group to develop some preliminary performas for types of development that maybe isn't what they typically build, so that there is some transparency in what profitability there is in different housing types, such as multifamily housing. The other thing we're working on right now is a middle housing handbook. So we'll be working on developing a development guide for middle housing. I think there's so much opportunity for folks as people age to develop a variety of housing types in neighborhoods that could support a lot of different types of families or single people or seniors. So we're really working to figure out how to leverage areas that maybe are underdeveloped that could support the development of multifamily housing. So that's sort of our approach, but generally I think the city of Medford has had a lot of changes in the last year from a leadership position, and we're really willing to make the time to meet with developers and talk about what their dreams and aspirations are, what they're trying to accomplish, and we would love to be partners. And not all cities are like that, but if you find a city that's willing to sit down and talk to you from a leadership perspective, I would definitely take advantage of that. Makes a big difference.
Thank you. So the aftermath of the 2020 Labor Day fires are still on the minds of many people in this region, and we're still solving the housing crisis related to that. Let's turn to Jamie. Can you please share with us key highlights of your experience and lessons learned as the City of Talent's interim city manager just after the wildfires, and later as executive director for a nonprofit developer, navigating the challenges local jurisdictions face trying to develop a rapid response to rebuild?
Absolutely. And first, let me actually piggyback on something Michelle said, because we found out, just talking to each other beforehand, we actually worked as planners at the same city. I worked there a little bit before her, and that city was known, they were literally part of a book called Reinventing Government. And so what Michelle's talking about is, I'm just really give the city a lot of props and really excited for the city, because the stuff she's talking about is really a model for governance. So it's also, if you're in government, talk to her and get some of those best practices. She's got a lot to share in that regard. And so, didn't mention before, in terms of my background, that ties into this disaster preparedness. My background was I have background in civil engineering, also as a planner, AICP, and then also as an attorney focused on natural resource law, water law, and Indian law. And all of that came to bear in talent. And so, again, I stepped in a couple months after the fire, was asked to help with the transition. We all know the devastation of wildfire. Oregonians across the state are seeing it, but especially here in Southern Oregon, it causes intense stress, it causes intense pressure. Shout out actually to the LTRG, Long-Term Recovery Group, for their work. So this was talent right afterwards. So 744 homes were absolutely destroyed, and you saw some of the pictures for what that looked like. A lot of those, when you see those clusters, were mobile homes. Day one, when I got in there at the beginning of January, I scribbled this on the whiteboard, and it stayed up my entire time there. And it was really about setting those priorities, from rebuilding the team, from community engagement, which was critical, because, as I said, a lot of the folks whose lives were impacted lost their homes were farm workers. There was some levels of discomfort and distrust of government. Also, accessibility, understanding community is critically important. And know what you don't know, and bring in people who can do that work. Resource development always is, of course, it's a small town under 5,000, and you just don't have the resources to recover something like that. And then housing, it came up, both that emergency, that interim, and the long term. And so we did work to address all those stages of housing. And I also want to give a big shout out to Dick Converse is here from RV Cog. He came in, I was able to twist his arm and bring him in, and he helped to get probably 2 years worth of work done in 6 months. But big shout out to that man over there, he's incredible. Okay, for wildfire response, the big challenges, the stress on staff and losing a lot of staff, the limited resources, housing, as I mentioned. So permitting, just to give you a sense, and this is before the city lost staff, the average home permits that were processed were 3 per month. After the fire, the demand jumped to 50 per month, and we essentially lost virtually all our staff before Dick stepped in. So that was substantial, that challenge. Community trauma, of course, also. So how do we overcome these challenges? We worked on team building within the city and also partnerships. So staff support, the standard things you think about of training and support, hiring, celebrating your successes, consultants. Intergovernmental agreements was big. We didn't have the expertise on flooding. There was one federal agency who insisted on running through flood reviews. We had just come out of a wildfire. They were focused on flooding. But the city of Medford actually stepped in and helped us with that. The city of Gold Hill sent us a planner 2 days a week. So partnerships are everything. Resource development, the state stepped up. There was some emergency funding from the state. We also had the opportunity to get some federal funding, LOIs as letters of intent. I worked with some great consultants there. So housing creation, I'm going to get into that in just a minute, some of the things we did. But we, again, looked at immediate, interim, and long-term. And then that expedited permitting. We had to come up with some really creative things with that kind of demand. 50 was on the short side. And so we did all sorts of community engagement. We got volunteers to come in that were overseen by planners, so it was all legit, if there's anyone here doing that assessment. But we had supervision, but we had folks coming in doing some of those small step processes that we would get volunteers to do. So we had to come up with all sorts of creative things. Big shout out to the mayor and council who stepped in, and the planning commission also did a lot of that volunteer. And then community, of course, engagement. Let me start first with the community engagement piece. The city of Talent, under 5,000, we had both interpretation was offered and translation of all our town halls, our community meetings. And that was both important to make it accessible and also to make a statement to the community. And when we invited the community to weigh in, and we invited FEMA to listen in our community meetings, they needed the translators because the testimonies were being given in Spanish. And it was a real aha moment to see FEMA folks who are used to kind of driving the ship to need the interpretation to actually understand people's stories. It's a key piece of it. And I brought in a colleague who's magnificent, who's still at the city. One feature of housing when you have a disaster is, of course, debris removal. This is a before and after shot, actually, of Talent Estates, and CASA's gone in to do some great work on this site. So housing solutions on the temporary or the immediate, and some of this, if you're in a city, think about putting these things in place in case you need them. So I was able to do an executive order to streamline the process for emergency housing, use of space, so kind of stretching the comfort zone of planning laws on a temporary basis under the emergency order for people being able to use a wide variety of accommodation on their site. This also actually impact and allowed for the Gateway project. On transitional housing, there were folks who were FEMA eligible, and we actually got on the totem pole mobile home park, the first in the nation FEMA construction on burn scar site, as well as recognizing we had a lot of people who are not FEMA eligible, and so did a lot of work to set the stage for Gateway so that we could serve the entire community. That was a huge priority of the governor, the mayor and council. And then temporary use permits. Of course, always in compliance with state and building code for safety. But Dick actually worked on that project specifically, seeing how much we could allow for rebuilds and what kind of flexibility we could allow, that it would still ensure safety, but allow people to build homes and get back in their homes. We leverage those FEMA investments, as I mentioned. Another thing is, in 6 months, we also updated our municipal code, because, yeah, that's a quick process. Also look at permitted rebuilds. So an intense amount of work with some great consultants, again, had staff that were doing phenomenal things. But we recognized that for folks who were looking to rebuild then, we needed to provide more opportunities around land use. And then partnerships. Everyone up here and their organizations all were part of the partnerships that were critical, but also doing some hand-holding with landowners not just Totem Pole, that site, but also on Talent Mobile Estates. FEMA, I pointed FEMA to that site. They're like, no, the property owner's not interested. So I reached out to him separately. We had a long conversation. He started the conversation. I was talking with the head, also the executive director of CASA, planting the seeds for those partnerships and bringing people to the table is sometimes what you have to do, frankly, whatever role you're in, if you want to see that move forward. Renaissance Flats also, that was part of a brainstorm partnership. We did a virtual meeting, and they were on that, and they followed up some questions, and actually that led to that project. So just a huge shout out to both the staff who worked their hearts out, a true statement of public service, inspiring. It was an awesome privilege to work with them. And then also, like I said, the mayor and council, it was actually almost challenging because they'd say, go out and build houses. And there was, as you all know, there's multiple components of building houses, but they so wanted to see things done. So having that support was really phenomenal. And then one of the ideas that came out of that time in a conversation was getting this call I mentioned from Barry and Catherine Thalden. They initially wanted to build in Talent, to build this project there, but it was really challenging because right after the wildfire, a lot of the property owners were massively escalating their purchase price for their property. And so I helped the Thaldens find this great property in Medford, over 6 acres, that had already had a PUD in place. It needed some modifications. We needed to go through the process, but it was already a residential area. And I thought my role was done. I was literally driving back home to Central Oregon when I got a call from the Thaldens and said, hey, can you help us bring some partners in? And so just from having worked with some amazing people in the area, we started to set up these meetings. And at this point, we've had over 80 community engagement meetings, partner meetings. And it was really important to the Thaldens to make sure that this was fire resilient, but there was community engagement, and it was a community-led process. What did the community need? Looking at the designs, working with the city to try to make those modifications. And those are actually ongoing. There's actually supposed to be one today right now, but it got bumped till next week. So shout out also to the partners in the room who've been part of this. The initial visual, and this plan has been modified, this is the site. It's right adjacent to a park, a city park, which is great. It is single-family home, but high density, or meets the probably medium density, but a higher density. Using the land trust model, so people can buy the home, have that home ownership, but the land trust is the land around it. It's a 99-year lease. And it's right around, Blackbird and some of those areas. It's right in that vicinity, so close to shops and such. So I love this quote. Challenges are what make life interesting, and overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. There's no greater quote, I think, for affordable housing, and you all face all the time. So just, thumbnail sketch some of the challenges we faced from the New Spirit Village project. Finding that site, the initial funding, and the Thaldens stepped in on that. The community engagement and expertise. We had groups, Coalition Futulaza, several colleagues are here. Access has been amazing. Unité, so I've got a later partner list, but there's been from community-based organizations to elected officials, Pam Marsh and also Jeff Golden, our 2 U.S. senators I mentioned, really engaged in it. Everything's about partnerships, I think, in this work. The long-term affordability, Proud Ground stepped in to handle that, and they are a great partner as well. So that community land trust model. Land use approvals, that was initially a challenge. I think the things that Michelle was talking about is going to be huge for future development in the city, and so really excited about that process, and there's others in the city who've leaned into that. And, we learn and grow and overcoming them, and I think that team partnership has been really a great thing. Funding from the city, from the state, United Way of Jackson County, Oregon Community Foundation. We've had a lot of folks who've given a lot or a little that have been part of that stone soup approach. If you know that story, it's very much a stone soup type project. Sales, surprisingly, sales were slow to kick off. And part of it, and we were on that land use, the land trust conversation today, and I know a lot of land trusts are explaining the model to the community. People getting familiar with it is part of the hurdle that we're facing in that sector. So that was initially a slower process, but we've got Jacob is here, and he's been our sales, actually Proud Ground sales rep, because they're responsible for sales, and doing a phenomenal job, and we're learning a lot in that process. We're trying to document and share that information. Again, something else OCF is really focused on, that learning process. And then just adjusting to leadership challenges as things come in, and those are always opportunities. But we face those challenges, but again, it's overcoming them is really what makes this work so meaningful. This was one of our first families to move in. Sales are going gangbusters. Now we're actually behind on construction at this point, where sales are going so well. And then just some of the basic details if folks have it. I won't go through this in detail. I will only focus on the partners. And again, I've mentioned some of them, but it's just an amazing group of people who've come together, heart-driven, focused on caring for our community, providing home ownership opportunities, helping people get out of cycles of generational poverty, helping wildfire survivors have a home, having lost theirs in such a cruel way. And with that, again, a huge thank you to all the partners.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about community land trusts and look at the role of innovative land use and housing types as a tool for local nonprofits and residential communities to hold land in perpetuity, primarily for the benefit of low and moderate income families and communities. So Talia, can you speak to some of the resources that OHCS has to support this type of development?
Sure. And I'll just take a step back and say our supportive land trust is interconnected because OHCS offers a number of tools for homeownership. So we seek to boost the supply of affordable homes through some funding that I'll talk about in a second. We also work on equitable pathways for homeowners. So we fund organizations like Access, who's gotten a lot of shout out today because they should. They're doing amazing work in as a homeownership center, providing pre and post purchase education and down payment assistance and match savings accounts and foreclosure avoidance counseling. And we have 15 centers around the state like Access that do that work. We also have DPA providers like Klamath Housing Authority and 21 other organizations that are working with homeowners on that really long pathway. Sometimes it's a couple months, sometimes it's years to get home buyer ready. And then once they've done all that hard work, there needs to be a place for people to go. So we have OHCS, we're talking about housing production here. We have a land access or program, a revolving loan program, land acquisition, where developers, if you're looking at a piece of land and there's, you have a little time, you can access our revolving loan fund to purchase the land at low interest rates. And you just have to commit to having it affordable and to build within 8 years. That program is closed right now, but it works really well with our LIFT program, which is Local Innovations and Fast Track Homeownership. The LIFT program is a really interesting case study of how state policy has somewhat, I don't want to overstate our role, but has kind of changed the landscape of homeownership development in the state. It's a program that uses infrastructure bond funding, so Article 11Q bond funding that traditionally has been used to build roads or bridges. And in 2015, there was legislation making it possible to be used for housing, so rental and homeownership housing. And the legal interpretation of how it could be used for homeownership was that it had to be, the state has to have an ongoing operating interest in the, or ownership in the property. And so for the state to have an operating interest, we want homeowners to own their homes and not have interference from the state. So we work with shared equity providers or developers and stewards that maintain ownership in the land. And so the state takes an interest, an operating interest through a lien in the land, and then the homeowner owns the home and has a ground lease with the steward that's helping steward the ground lease and making sure that property is maintained in the portfolio and homeowners are supported. So that's how we kind of got this wonky, weird way of supporting community land trusts. It doesn't have to be a community land trust. That is the most popular model, but we can also support condo structures. Often the condos that we've supported have a CLT, are CLTs but have a condo overlay. And then this year we're funding our first limited equity cooperative, which is residents are paying a small share to become part of the cooperative. So this model has been used by Square One Villages out in the Eugene area. They pay about $5,000, so they don't need a mortgage. So really great option for those that have a really long pathway to being mortgage ready. They pay a share to become a member of the co-op, and then they pay a monthly, basically a rent, but it's a monthly housing payment charge and are part of this cooperative structure. So we're mostly funding CLTs, but there are other really innovative models out there that we've seen expand. And just to give you an idea of how this has kind of changed things in Oregon, and I think it coincides with a lot of other things that are happening. But in our first year of operating LIFT in 2018, we could not get enough folks to come and apply. We used about $5 million. There was a lot of work on the developers' part at that time to navigate this really complex process. And now we've done some work with our partners to change the structure of how it operates. So we were facing issues with funding rural areas. Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon has been really underrepresented in our portfolio, partly because we could only fund up to the appraised value of the land, and sorry if this is getting too detailed. But we've changed our structure with the help of developers coming together and saying we need a per unit subsidy based on bedroom size, so we can really do a lot more of the gap funding. So LIFT is meant to fund the difference between what it costs to build and then what it costs to sell at an affordable price. And so often we're seeing about the average cost to build is around $550,000, and the average cost that they're being sold at through our developers is just under half of that. So we're filling in for the gap along with other sources. We often can't fill the full subsidy gap. So just to paint a picture of how much this has changed over time, we had a couple developers come in 2018. This year we had our biggest application pool. I think we had over about 23 applicants applying for $42 million in funds, and there were $90 million in requests. So there's just been an amazing expansion of capacity to build across the state and do homeownership development, and so now the state is having trouble keeping pace with that. We have a lot of Habitat affiliates across the state that represent our LIFT portfolio, and they've done amazing work to give technical assistance on how you shift into the land trust model. And at our table today, sorry for the repeat for those that came to the community land trust table, we were talking about the difference between fully going all in into a community land trust versus just operating a land trust structure. And so, having the governance of home buyers in your governance structure. So on your board is what makes you fully commit into a community land trust, and it's in your bylaws, whereas some habitats are, they're maintaining the ownership in the land, but they're not fully converting to the full land trust, community land trust model, and both are fine with OHCS. The most important part is that there's that ownership structure in the land, and I think for us, it wasn't what we set out. The state didn't have this intentional policy to only fund community land trusts, but it's been an amazing outcome of the program because we do a one-time investment in these homes, and the investment stays with these homes, home buyer after home buyer after home buyer, every time they sell. And we're not having to invest in them again. I mean, we could put in some repair funding or other stuff. They're not locked out of more state investment, but it's a much more sustainable investment than, say, compared to down payment assistance, which stays with the home buyer. And both are desperately needed throughout the state, but this has just been a really impactful way of supporting the home buyer and the supply at the same time.
Thank you. Do you see, Talia or Jamie, either one, do you see any barriers to CLTs in Southern Oregon that need to be addressed?
Sure. I would say this is a barrier for all our emerging CLTs, is that when you're signing up to be a CLT, you're signing up to steward these ground leases for 99 years. So you have to be really sure that you're going to have staying power as an organization or have 10 backup plans for what will happen to these homes. So we are seeing that there's eagerness and capacity and the acumen to build. And then once the homes are built, it's the operational piece to keep them going, keep them sustained, keep the home buyer support. And I think that's just, it's not because of the organizations, it's just because it's new in our state, and so we're collectively evolving to figure out how to support each other in that piece.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, that's really the bottom line and the challenge. There's all these ideas emerging, but that incorporating that sustainability piece to it. And just switching hats, well, not here in the official capacity of, but I serve on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, the OWEB board statewide. And OWEB, there's a lot of conservation land trusts around the state. And that's a long-term, it's been going on for a couple decades. And so here in Oregon, we have a model for that. There's a statewide agency, the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, COLT, which helps to support local land trusts for conservation easements, so protecting land for conservation purposes. We're now seeing the emergence of land trusts for homes. And there was even a question that we had at the table earlier when someone was saying, is this a new thing? Well, technically, no. It dates way back. But in Oregon, in terms of a common practice, yes, it is quite new. And so I've also been reaching out as part of this Oregon Community Foundation effort, looking at some other states and what they're doing in the models they have. Some have a statewide model and then more kind of subsidiaries in different parts of the state. Some are very much have their own local land trusts that feed into an overall organization. It's like a membership organization. Oregon is in the process of developing and figuring out what that model looks like. And so I think the most important thing with the end goal of that sustainability, because otherwise it puts the state in a tough spot of investing public dollars in something that may or may not have longevity. And also it's a trust thing. Part of the challenge is explaining to people what a community land trust is, and if they've placed their trust in your organization, that they can rely on that for 99 years. I mean, that's a burden we should be thinking about and taking on as we're thinking about developing this. But developing models, trying to learn and grow together with the eye to essentially supporting each other for this long-term longevity is going to be the key. And there's different models. There's a lot of learning going on right now. But I really think that here in Oregon, in the next couple of years, that's going to be the big thing of gelling around that learning, sharing best practices, and figuring out what model is going to work for Oregon.
Thank you. Very good. Our final question is directed to Michelle. And looking to the future, can you share your reflections on what technical assistance and resources you think local communities in Southern Oregon are going to need to successfully assist planning for and addressing barriers to expanded housing production?
Yeah, I mean, I think that technical assistance is looking at redevelopment potential and looking at underutilized locations that have had a long history and sort of underdeveloped in the sense that they're an industry or a type of site that at one point was on the fringes of the community, is now in a developed area and really could be supported to be redeveloped. And I think that's getting away from looking at greenfields or even just areas that are undeveloped altogether and looking at how to change that lens of redeveloping existing developed sites that could function in a totally different way. I think that's a huge challenge. I think it's a long history of looking at greenfields or looking at undeveloped land as an opportunity and not maybe using land that's already served with utilities and services and transportation and part of the fabric of the community as a developable site. I think that is, the biggest gap right now that I see for the city of Medford is that there's a tremendous amount of developability, but it is not as easy to develop and maybe not as friendly to develop in the eyes of a developer. And how do we put together materials to communicate to the development community that, hey, this old warehouse that hasn't been used for 10 years is in a location that we would love to see multifamily housing. What does it cost to do it for you? How is it different than building single-family homes for you? What can we put together as a community to partner with you to develop something that's either affordable with a capital A or affordable by design or fits the community as far as a new housing type? I think that's a huge opportunity for a city the size of Medford that is untapped, and I'm hoping that we can see a shift.
Sean?
Yeah, if I can just tag on to that response too, because I think this is a place where also the HAPO plays a role in being a partner in that work that, like the city of Medford and other local governments are doing. I think we've seen on this panel just like the level and extent of dedicated hard work and partnership it takes to scale and see outcomes and see production right on the ground actually happening. And I think one of the roles that we're directed to play and something that we're really wanting to embrace is this idea that as a partner at the HAPO, one of our biggest roles is to connect local governments with the resources that they need, the capacity that they need to be able to do this, right? To be able to step up and be able to take on those roles to support that. And of course, also provide the technical assistance, the guidance, the compiling the best practices, all of that to really kind of provide tools that are actually useful in achieving production on the ground. And just one thing that I'll also emphasize here too is also to the extent that we can being a resource for the housing development community in achieving those things on the ground. So I just wanted to tag on to that just to say, we have this directive, we have these resources to really support local government capacity. There's actually, and I know I've mentioned this to a lot of planners and local government folks in this room, there's an application process open right now that's going to be open for the next 2 months that we highly encourage folks to apply for related to housing. Yeah.
I just have to, don't cherry pick from small communities.
I'm sorry?
Don't cherry pick staff from small communities I beg you. That
was
a huge
poach
challenge.
them. Sorry. we are not expanding at this time.
We'll definitely be trying to take advantage of those funds because we have some ideas.
Thank you for your comments. Before we close, I'd like to give the opportunity to ask questions. If anybody has a question, I'll run the mic over to you. And
thank you for your presentation. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is SB 1013 and also the modification that was done with 1013. Can you address that?
Can you speak to what Senate Bill 1013 is? I'm not familiar.
SB 1013 codified in September of last year, which basically allows secondary residence to RVs to be used as secondary residence if you have a primary residence in the county. In the city, with the modification of 97.493, something like that, it allows RVs to be primary residences when they are in an RV park or in a mobile home park. And that was, like I said, September of last year. And quite frankly, there's a lot of cities that don't even know that that bill exists. And my understanding is that that bill has to be adopted city by city, but it's on the books and it's enforced right now.
Yeah, so let me speak to this question a little bit. So I'm not familiar with the specific bill that you're referencing, but I am familiar with laws that relate to the siting and occupancy of manufactured homes, prefabricated homes, recreational vehicles occupied as residential dwellings, at least in the context of land use and permitting. I should note kind of a little bit at the outset, one of the things to know about HAPO is we have kind of defined scope of housing laws that says, all right, these are the laws that you're looking at and looking to ensure implementation of on the ground. That does include like housing like manufactured and prefabricated housing, but it doesn't include a lot more of the kind of like temporary shelter options such as recreational vehicles. So I just want to make that clarification really quickly that like we have a role as an office related to housing, but it doesn't necessarily encompass everything under the sun. But with that in mind, there is a law on the books that does protect the occupancy of residential vehicles that are sited in RV parks or in manufactured home parks. Is that the policy that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's only in the city. But SB 1013 specifically says that if there's conditions as to the RV, they have to be hooked up legally to water, sewer, and electric. But in the city, you've got the ability for the product to be permanent residence if it's in an RV park or a mobile home park.
Yep.
In the county, if you have a primary residence, you're allowed at least one RV as a secondary residence, which you can do long-term renting or leasing with. And there are a number of options available that, quite frankly, I think the government, at least at the municipality level, hasn't realized that those are viable options. And I strongly suggest that you need to take a look at SB 1013.
Sure, yeah. And just to speak a little bit more to our role there, I think one of the roles that we can play is kind of helping local governments, be familiar as state laws change, right, that relate to different kind of options, to provide that technical support and guidance that they need. Of course, recognizing that we have limits on our statutory authority and scope, but really to kind of be that resource. So, yeah, thank you for raising it.
One more thing, I apologize. That also speaks
Just a clarification there. Building codes are state. It's a state preemption, yeah.
Just to piggyback on, one of the things you also flagged is that distinction between local control and state law, and sometimes they, it's a whole conversation right there. But but that awareness that can be implemented is a good flag. But there's also a lot of tension that we've seen around different jurisdictions who will jump on board on things or also not be interested in doing so. But that can even come with projects. In New Spirit Village, we actually were funded for one thing, and the city approved something else. And so figuring out how to close that gap is part of the challenge that can also come up with projects.
Hi, Ryan Kane with Pinnacle Architecture. We have some clients that are interested in the land trust model. One of their concerns is that you talked about that 99-year lease. You're building homes that are going to need substantial rehabs multiple times over those 99 years and potentially rebuilds, likely rebuilds in that time as well. So if I could have a better understanding of other policies you put in place of when a building needs deferred maintenance or needs to be rebuilt, who does that fall on?
I can just say for New Spirit Village, there is a monthly, it's $50 a month, just a monthly fee, if you will, to the property owner, the homeowner, that goes into a long-term bucket that helps to address some issues, and that's separate from an HOA, because this is a separate development. Land Trust can also do individual homes. But you raise a good point, and that goes into that overall calculation and how that money is managed. But a 99-year lease, it does flag for long-term viability, as we mentioned, is a huge consideration piece. So that being part of the conversation is important. Specifically, we've got documents that, if I got permission, I could potentially share that assessment went into that fee for the monthly land trust fee, but it's how people are going to do that calculation and their consideration is going to vary by group, by organization.
Yeah, we're looking to do more standardization around how we support CLTs and preparing for that. We've seen a spectrum of how people plan for that. We have one developer that into their pro forma build in money to seed fund a reserve account to like jumpstart that for their home buyers, homeowners. We have others that just rely on the homeowners to save for that maintenance. So, and I think it's pretty standard that the ground lease fee, part of it is going towards the need for repairs, and then part of it is going to fund the CLT's just ongoing operations and support of those home buyers and the ground lease and just all the stewardship activities. So it really is a range, and so that's a great question. I think there's a need for more training and information about that with CLT developers in the state so we can all plan ahead. I think that homeownership development pro formas are often a lot simpler than rental multifamily building because there isn't that like after planned for. It's like we build and then we're gone. But it does add this like little gray area or maybe large gray area depending on what happens for the CLT afterwards.
Hi, I'm back here. I'm interested in talking about tax credits that might benefit municipalities and other nonprofits. And I particularly work with an organization that has tax credits that are attached to properties that are being developed. And that would include, say, a $5 tax credit for heat generation or heat savings. These kinds of tax credits, you as a municipality or an entity of government could be available to translate into dollars. Sell them at a discount, for instance. They give you a perspective. A building that would cost, say, $100 million to build, take off the land price. See, that's $2 million. Well, wait a minute, we don't live in that world. And let's just say there was 80% left. Well, that 80% that was left could be applied to building a shelter, whatever you wanted to use, but it comes out of a tax credit attached to the building, the initial building, meeting the criteria that are actually in the IRS code. So if anybody's interested in jumping through those hoops, they're lots of fun.
I think there's some creative financing that municipalities are starting to look at, and tax credits is one of them. I can't speak to your question directly. I think it is a really good point and something that I think we'll go back and think about if there's a way to leverage tax credits for future development, but it's not something that I think the city of Medford's done a lot of so far. We do have some property tax programs for multifamily housing and affordable housing that aren't a benefit to the city, but a benefit to the developers, which seems to be an incentive. But I'll think more about your tax credit question as far as benefiting the city itself.
Just feeling the credit is another shout out. Energy Trust of Oregon provides a lot of resources to support some additional work, and on some sustainability issues, there may be things that not directly what you're talking about, but related in terms of tax credit.
I'll just say the state manages a whole alphabet soup of tax credits for multifamily buildings, and I don't know enough to speak to it eloquently up here, but those are things that developers are actively tapping into for buildings, and those are, managed at the federal level and come down through the state.
That's John again. Hey, I did a project with the state of California back during the Obama years, and it was called the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, PACE. And it developed projects for high efficiency heating and solar and all these things. And the flower child of that whole deal was in a city called Santa Rosa, California. You will want to look that up. Property Assessed Clean Energy is where they put, with the utilities and the city or county, money together in a trust where people can build super efficient solar systems to go along with their remodeled air conditioning and heating, whatever, and get this money transferred to them through Public Works Department of the county or the city and go into their tax bill and transfer with the property. If they sold it, the debt would transfer. And the only thing that blocked it in the residential area was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were angry because they didn't get to be first on the lien. So the city of Santa Rosa decided to just take it on and encompass it, and then it took off. So now it's statewide. I have it in every single county in the state of California. And that was 25 years ago when I was a youngster or whatever, during the first part of Obama. It was a good program and still flourishing in the state of California. Might take a look at Santa Rosa and bring those people to you and get that up here where we can rock.
Thank you, that's great. Thanks for the information.
While she's walking over, I saw Karen. Karen, can you put your hand up? Energy Trust of Oregon. There she is. So if you want to hear about some of the programs Energy Trust of Oregon has, they're amazing. Go talk to Karen afterwards.
They have a lot of programs, too. My name is Rihanna. I'm with Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. I work with Talia sometimes because we're trying to make sure folks know how to use the LIFT, as we call it, for homeownership funding. And often our habitats are new to the land trust model that they need to then use in order to access that funding when it comes to the home sales. So a couple of quick things, right, that I just wanted to mention. I think that that's important to some of the questions that have come in the room. I think one of the things that's a challenge for land trust models is the myths associated with ownership when you have two owners, right? So often people think, oh, well, you don't own the land, you don't actually own the house, right? But the legal documentation that's legally required for a land trust kind of binds the improvements upon the land, which is the house, to the land itself, protecting both owners, right? So I think that's just really important to say. And when it comes to longevity, right, often we're actually not talking about 99 years. We're talking about kind of in perpetuity, because anytime there's a transfer or sale, it's another up to the 99-year mark, right? So that means it's 99 years and then you sell it, and oh, that was 15 years later, but it's 99 years again, right? So I think that like is the idea of forever, right? Lasting affordability or permanent affordability is kind of the idea. So I think that's a really important note. And because you're a homeowner, just like every other homeowner, especially if it's a single-family home, simple single-family home, right? You, as a homeowner, are still responsible for repairs, for maintenance, for those types of things. And depending on the resale formula, in order to keep that affordable in perpetuity, right, or for 99 years, you have a resale formula that goes along with an affordable base price that you're selling it for, right? These are like kind of regular rules that go along with land trust that have to do with those legal documents that make sure that another low-income buyer can actually afford to buy the house, because that's the whole point, right? So there's a lot that goes into this, and the learning curve to do land trust model is big. We all have to make sure, like, as you're doing it, this is like you can go down a rabbit hole and learn a lot about it. And I think that that's one of the barriers that I see, right, is that there's just a lot of misconceptions around land trusts, and we still use community land trust, but that's a legal term technically, and it's really just a land trust instead of a community land trust. I mean, there are like definition problems and conflating words even and terms that come along with this as well. What is cool about it is that instead of, as Talia mentioned, and I'm highlighting this because this is really important, what's cool about it is the subsidy, instead of just subsidizing one family, that subsidy doesn't stick with the home buyer, it sticks with the house, right? And so the next home buyer is using the same subsidy, and we don't have to re-subsidize. So that's a repeat, but it's really important in this world, because then we stop thinking about home ownership, affordable home ownership per homeowner, and we start thinking about it as a community asset, right? Because how many affordable homes do you have in your community that you know are going to be affordable in 20 years? That's what the key is to this lasting affordability piece. It's that longevity, right? And it becomes a community asset, not just one homeowner at a time asset. And so that model shift is something that a lot of habitats are doing across the state of Oregon. And I just wanted to make sure we all were aware. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention, we mentioned tax credits. What's cool about this too is that if you have a nonprofit that owns the land under your house and you have a land trust model, you get a discount on your taxes, your property taxes every year. There are perks that kind of come along with this that are really kind of neat. So you're buying a house that's way lower than a market appraised value house, right? Because you have resale restrictions. And then your property taxes are going to be probably about 30, and I'm guesstimating, but the average, if you talk to Proud Crown CLT, is about 30% lower because the nonprofit that owns the property under your house doesn't have to pay property taxes because we passed that bill a while back, right? We advocated for that so that it's owned by a nonprofit. It doesn't have to include property. We don't pay property taxes as a nonprofit, right? So these are little perks that come along with this model associated with some of the state funding that OHCS is working with, right? That's that lift for homeownership funding that really can create a situation where instead of over subsidizing one home buyer with affordable housing, we then end up with that lasting piece in the community. So that was sorry, I had to get on the soapbox there, folks.
Good soapbox, 100%. Two other shout outs. Jacob, can you put up your hand? If you want some of those details in going down to the micro level, Jacob can answer those for New Spirit Village and in general. So find him. I give Karen a shout out. You don't necessarily need to say anything, Jacob, but it's up to you, obviously. But you find him. He can go into the detail in New Spirit Village. The other thing I wanted to just a slight tweak is on maintenance. Yes, maintenance of the home is the homeowner, but it's maintenance of common space. So the sidewalks, the streets, if they are private streets, they are in our case. But that's usually that maintenance component. But thank you.
Jamie, you forced a microphone into my hand. To answer both the gentleman in the blue shirt's question, hey there, blue shirt. The New Spirit Village's model for making sure that that maintenance, that essentially everything is maintained in perpetuity, is that there is a required home inspection that the owner pays for at every sale. And that home inspection report is sent to the steward, so whoever is running the CLT, and then they review that report, and then they require those repairs of the owner in order for the sale to happen. So if let's say you've been in a property long enough to pay off your mortgage, sort of thing, you've been there 3 decades, you've also run your roof and your HVAC system and your paint job. I mean, those things are at end of life. And so there's going to be some repairs that are going to come out of the proceeds of the sale to revive that property to an acceptable standard. So that's the model that Proud Ground uses to ensure that these stay affordable for the long term. And that may sound like a really high cost, but the benefit that the homeowner gets during that time is that their rent, or I guess their cost of housing, put it that way, never went up, right? They had a mortgage, so they locked in and they got inflation on their side as opposed to working against them with perpetually rising rent. And with our new lift amendments, they actually have a more likely path to their cost of housing going down because they have the ability now to refinance and drive their cost of home ownership down. So it's not CLTs are not a panacea. Habitat lady, you are right. You are right that it is a complicated problem, but we shouldn't be afraid of the complexity. We should seek to understand it, because it can absolutely bridge and solve the problem of, listen, in my market where I live, if you want to go buy a house, it starts at $2,600 a month. If you want to rent a 3-bedroom, it starts at $2,300. And we can go ahead and get people into home ownership where that cost is less than that with no down payment. And that moves us towards solving the housing crisis.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more quick question before we wrap up.
Hi, you mentioned earlier talking about the risks and complexity of the pre-development process, and I was just wondering if you guys, in 30 seconds or less, just if you could share any of the ways that you've seen have been beneficial in mitigating those risks, or getting that landowner that wants to develop housing, they know approximately what they want to do with it, but no idea how to get to point B.
Can I just add, I'm actually very interested in the answer here, because I actually get a lot of inquiries from property owners who don't know, the ins and outs of development, and I'm like, well, there's laws, I'm very interested to hear.
Well, I think there's different answers for the level of development you're speaking about. If it's just a homeowner, we try regularly to put information together so people have access to plans or the steps of process or resources about their properties. We have quite a bit of information that people can access just by either contacting the department or looking online. The City of Medford has a pretty robust pre-application process, which is very inexpensive, and we encourage all developers to utilize it, which means they come in, they give us basically a site plan, elevation, floor plan, or just simple design drawings with information about their project and the property. It gets circulated to all of our departments, and they get an estimate of what the fees are going to be, what the complications might be of the project, hurdles they might have, resources we can offer them, and try to start that engagement really early in the process. Many cities have this process. I don't know that all developers utilize it because it is a step, and in some developers may feel like it takes a little more time to go through that, but again, I think I said in the beginning, start early, because the more you can pre-design your project to meet the needs of the community and what the code is asking for, the better off you'll be in the long run. So utilizing any application process that's up there. And then again, we often come across programs with the state, grants that are available, and we are in touch with, for affordability specifically, funds that might be out there, and we don't have a partner to put those funds with. And so there's always an opportunity to just make those relationships so that we go, oh, that person has a 20-acre property they've been trying to think about how to do a land trust on. They didn't have enough money to do the initial planning. There's a grant coming up. Maybe we can partner with them to get that project off the ground and get some seed money in. So I just think thinking ahead and utilizing the city as a partner.
And continuous improvement. New Spirit Village found some challenges. It was anticipated to be a couple months and to be a 2-year process. But also things changed and things were modified and there was improvement. I mean, some of the stuff that Michelle's talking about and Sam, who may or may not be here, the city has really made an intentional decision to make things the process more accessible. And so really want to celebrate and congratulate and thank that mindful decision. And the fact of the matter also, we're in Grants Pass, and there are challenges in different places. There's the politics of the region. And so the relationships piece that was mentioned, having a champion of the project is really key, and your community and what's needed there. Having a cheerleader, someone who keeps the team together. Partnerships are key to this work, I believe. Partnerships. And partnerships are complicated. People get in, there's conflict that comes up. It's not easy. But if you then have that cheerleader / facilitator / bring everyone together, keep it moving forward, a partnership well-developed, is very powerful. But relationships are important. I mean, we have laws, we have all those niceties, we can get some funding, that's great. There's also, we've seen in all our communities, roadblocks. And so partnerships, continuous improvement, I think are huge. And then those relationships keep finding a way to, keep finding a way to develop and encourage. And then give shout outs when those improvements are made. But just have a real mindset of continuous improvement and building and strengthening partnerships and working through the frustration of it, I think is key.
I'll just add on real quick, the continuous improvement on a state level. In the past, we've had this dynamic of you have to put forward a lot of resources and take on a lot of risk before coming in for funding because your project has to be feasible. And we recently made some changes on the rental side of transitioning to this ORCA process where you can come in and get a feasibility grant so that you can know that your project is actually going to be worth putting in more resources and then applying for larger funds. And we're doing that on the homeownership side as well, dependent on legislative funding. So I think there's acknowledgement on our level that the feasibility piece and pre-development needs to happen, and you can't take on all the risk for that. So, yeah.
So thank you. This has been a great panel, and everybody give a round of applause for our panelists. And I'm sure they'll be sticking around if you have any additional questions.